What determines your phenotype? Well, your phenotype is your observable characteristics. So when somebody looks at you, what can they see? Your hair color, your eye color, your weight, your height. These are physical observations. Another part of your phenotype is also those that are not easily observable, like your intelligence level or your athletic ability. All these represent your phenotype and make you who you are. Well, what determines who you are? Two main things determine who you are. One is your genotype, the collection of genes you have in the nucleus of your cells. Where did you get these genes from? Well, they were inherited from your parents. But that's not your destiny. Your environment that you grew up in also influences who you are. You may practice basketball for many hours and become talented, even though you might have not been predisposed to be. You might study and read a lot to increase your mental capabilities. This is all environmental influences that can have an influence upon your genes. So your genotype, in general, is just the makeup of your genes. And you've heard the word genes before. It has something to do with DNA. Genes are sections of DNA that code for a specific trait. So in the picture, gene number 1 may code for, say, eye color, while gene number 2 may code for, say, hair color. There are specific sections of your DNA that code for that trait. But let's get a little bit more specific. What does your DNA code for? There really is only one thing. Your DNA codes for the making of proteins. So how does that determine a trait? Well, proteins carry out actions in your body that result in a phenotypic trait. So it's actually just the result of the action of a protein. Well, when you talk about hair color and eye color and height, a lot of times you're talking about the influence of more than one gene. It's not as simple as the action of a single protein. So it can get really complicated trying to determine your phenotype and genotype characteristics. Let's start with traits that are determined by a single protein. And some of these, most well known, are diseases. For example, cystic fibrosis is caused by a mutation in the CFTR gene on chromosome 5. So the CFTR gene has some mutation in it, and it is not functioning properly. It codes for the making of a protein that is incorrect. The protein that should be made is an ion channel inserted in your respiratory and digestive system cells. This ion channel is important for the formation of mucus. If that ion channel is not working correctly, like in patients of cystic fibrosis, thick mucus builds up and becomes a blockage. This can become a huge problem and may lead to even an early death. 50% of people diagnosed with cystic fibrosis die before the age 30. In another example, sickle cell anemia causes a defect in the formation of a protein on your red blood cells. This defect is in the HBB gene on chromosome number 11. It causes hemoglobin to be made incorrectly and the shape to be altered slightly. So on the surface of your red blood cells, this protein has changed shape and has then altered the shape of your red blood cell. It is actually less efficient in carrying oxygen around your body and can result in serious effects in your lifetime and even death. But the phenotype of an individual is the result of interactions of tens of thousands of genes. It is a really complicated process and it's still not well understood. What we're going to work on in class is understanding the basics of how, in general, a trait can be inherited. So for every gene in your DNA, you actually have two different versions of it. And that's because you inherited half of your genetic information from your mother and the other half from your father. So they each gave you a different version of the same gene. For example, possibly the gene for eye color, your dad passed on an allele for brown eyes, while your mother passed on an allele for blue eyes. So now in your genes you have two alleles, brown eyes and blue eyes, both for the same gene, the gene for eye color. Now maybe the brown eye color allele is more dominant over the blue eye color allele. In that case, your eyes will appear blue even though you do, your eyes will appear brown even though you do have the blue allele present. The vice versa could also be true. Or possibly neither are very dominant and your eye color is some sort of combination. These different forms of a gene are called alleles and are usually represented with a letter. If it's a dominant allele, we typically use a capital letter. If it's a recessive allele, we typically use a lowercase letter. Not all alleles are created equal, so some have a stronger effect on the phenotype, and we call these the dominant alleles. In the picture shown, it represents peas that are round. Round peas is a dominant trait, so we're going to represent that with a capital letter. So let's take a capital letter A. Capital letter A will represent the allele for round peas. These peas in the picture must then have a capital A allele in their genes. They have to have two alleles, so the combination could either be two capital A's or capital A and a lowercase a. Recessive alleles are masked by the dominant allele. If there is a dominant allele present, then recessive alleles are not even seen. So the other version of the pea pod is wrinkled. This is a recessive trait. So those funny wrinkled peas in the picture must have two lowercase letters since they are recessive in their phenotype. Lowercase a is then the genotype of these peas. If there was a capital letter here, then the peas would appear round. So it must be that it must have two lowercase letters to show the recessive trait in the phenotype. So it's a combination of two alleles for a given gene that's going to determine the phenotype. In the example on the left, a round pea could be determined by two capital letter A's or a capital letter A and a lowercase letter a. It is this capital letter A, which is the allele for a round pea, that masks the recessive allele, the lowercase letter, that is an allele for wrinkled peas. The only time you'll be able to actually see the recessive allele in the phenotype is when there is no dominant allele present, as in the example on the right where there are two lowercase a's. This is the basis for what determines your phenotype. Now it does get a little bit more complicated as we'll discover as this unit progresses, but this will be our beginning point and your understanding of phenotype.